What we're going to do in this video is have a look at this exam question for A-level politics, which is, to what extent have pressure groups become more important in recent years? Now, this is an interesting discussion question that we can look at, and we're going to just highlight a few points that we could look at doing, and we're going to look at a couple of examples of different types of pressure groups and whether or not their importance have really been overstated or understated in politics. So we're going to have a look at first one side of the debate, which is pressure groups have become more important in recent years. We're going to look at these three issues, and then we're going to add a little bit of evidence and specific knowledge to the points that we're going to make, and then we're going to look at the opposite side. So first of all, pressure groups have become more important in recent years. Well, there's a number of points we could make. These are just 3 points. There could be loads of points, really. And I encourage you in the comment section to comment on any other points that you might want to make, and we can see just what other kinds of points one could write down. So the first one is that pressure groups have seen a growth in their numbers and in their diversity. Okay, so one of the reasons for this could be the introduction of the internet. Oopsie daisy. So why is this the case? So we have the introduction of the internet, and also specifically social media, and you've also got the fact that pressure groups have also seen a growth, not just a growth in numbers of their members, but also a growth of pressure groups. So if we just take this here, we'll say there's an increased number of pressure groups. Okay, and the number of pressure groups increasing also coincides with various political and socio-economic events. So an example of an increase, a sea change in the numbers of pressure groups can be during Brexit. Okay, so there were definitely Eurosceptic pressure groups before the 2016 Brexit referendum, but during the 2016 referendum, there were a number of other pressure groups that would do their part in trying to secure a leave vote for the 2016 Brexit referendum. So 2016 Brexit referendum. Okay, so these are just a couple of points that you could make about the increase in the number of and the different types of pressure groups. Another example could be through sort of environmental changes. So you have things like pressure groups like Greenpeace and the protection of birds. Okay, and these are becoming more and more prevalent, both in numbers of members within each pressure group and the numbers of pressure groups in general, because of the growing climate crisis that we are facing. So we've also got the second point we could talk about, which is the profile of pressure groups have increased due to the media. And I'd also again like to stress that this is media and social media. Okay, social media as well. So you have examples such as the Make Poverty History campaign. Make Poverty History campaign, things like Live Aid. So that was not particularly very recent, but a little bit less recent now. However, still something that happened within the last 20 years. And then we've also got things like Fathers for Justice campaigns. They often have a lot of media attention when they are, when we've got them dressing up as superheroes and trying to climb on to various buildings. We know that that gives them a lot of media attention, and that is another reason why pressure groups can be seen as being quite important, seeing as they're taking up a lot of the media attention when they're performing political stunts. We also see an increase in importance, and that coincides with an increase in single issue groups. So as we looked at in the videos where we looked at the types of pressure groups, single issue groups are, as the name implies, pressure groups that focus on a very particular issue. So for example, I mentioned it just a couple of seconds ago, we can talk about Greenpeace. Okay, we could talk about Greenpeace being a single issue group, and you could also talk about the various Leave and Remain campaigns and various Leave and Remain pressure groups as well. So these are just a couple of points that we can make to suggest that pressure groups have actually become more important in recent years. We can talk about the growth of and the diversity of different pressure groups. We can talk about the growth in numbers of membership, and we can talk about the increased media attention that some pressure groups are getting, and the increased importance of so-called single issue pressure groups. On the opposite side of this debate, we can take a couple of a different tact when we're looking at this. So we can the simplest way of structuring an essay would be to just have 3 points on one side and 3 points on the other side. Whereas if we link the points together and we try and find ways to critique these points, that's the best way we can really have a real structured and a good essay that flows all the way through. But for now, we're just going to look at why pressure groups have not become more important. And there's one or two different points we're going to make here. There are other points, and I encourage you to comment them if you want to. So the first one, there is a distinct lack of success for pressure groups. So one example of this is the Stop the War Coalition. Okay, Stop the War Coalition. The coalition here, and they were very loud, they were very boisterous, but they didn't prevent a war in Iraq. And we've also got more modern examples. So we can talk, again, Brexit is a brilliant example we can talk about, because Brexit is really probably the most political activism that we've seen in years. There are people on both sides of the debate, and you can talk about the various second referendum campaigns, which is a very good one. You can talk about things that they didn't actually succeed. You can talk about campaigns to get for us to leave with WTO rules. You can also talk again about environmental pressure groups, these sort of pushing for environmental changes that haven't really happened. You could also talk, if we're talking about different pressure groups, one that is particularly important at the moment, groups like Black Lives Matter. Okay. And really, this is a difficult one to bring up, because they have been relatively successful in recent months anyway at gaining media attention and gaining groups and gaining protests. But to the extent that they're achieving the institutional and structural changes that they want to achieve, that's a little bit less convincing. They have been successful in growing numbers, and they've been successful in doing a lot of surface level reforms when it comes to tackling racism in the world, and specifically in the UK. For example, the pulling down of statues. However, they've not been successful in changing the institutionalized racial divides that we have in this country. So there can be you could really argue for both sides when it comes to movements like Black Lives Matter, okay? And really, whether or not Black Lives Matter is even a pressure group on its own, is an interesting question. Really, it's a movement that seeks to pressure the government into reform, so effectively it fits the definition of a pressure group. But a very interesting one you could talk about. And again, you can also talk about environmental. So environmental issues, okay. So when it comes to political activism and pressure groups in this country, the two that are most prominent areas of political activism are on environmental issues and on Brexit at the moment. Okay, in very recent years, at least, anyway. So, trying to talk about them and trying to research how the various pressure groups here have been successful and not successful in their aims is a very good point. And then this isn't really a point against whether or not pressure groups have been more important or not. This is more of just an interesting position you could take when writing this essay, and that is that there hasn't actually been any kind of change in importance, because what you're being asked here is, to what extent have pressure groups become more important in recent years? You could argue that the trend in pressure group success hasn't actually changed at all, really. It's not become more or less important. So you could actually draw upon these older campaigns, Make Poverty History and the Stop the War Coalition, as an indication that they were or weren't successful back then, and they are just as successful or unsuccessful today. So you could really draw that link. You can either go one side suggesting that they are more important, you could say that they're not more important, or you could just say there's actually not been any kind of change. And that's really what we could talk about. Put in the comments anything that you would note that you could talk about, any other kind of pressure group related evidence that you could talk about, and we'll see what kind of things that people could use in evidence. Now pin any comment with really good evidence that you could use.